It all started with a slip of the tongue at our own dinner table. I was telling a story about my late husband Tom, and I couldn't find the right word. My daughter Jessica just stared at me, her eyes cold as ice. The air grew thick and heavy. Later, as we cleared the plates, Tom asked her about a strange charge on our bank statement. That's when she leaned in close, so close I could feel her breath on my cheek. "Friend, before I go on, let me ask you, would you do me a kindness? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me see just how far my story reaches." She leaned into my ear, and her voice was a snake's hiss. "You won't live long enough to need it," she whispered. My blood turned to ice. Tom didn't hear it. He just saw his daughter whispering a secret to his wife. But I heard it for what it was. It wasn't a cruel joke from a daughter who was stressed out. It was a promise. In that moment, I knew the fight for my life had just begun. The next morning, I couldn't get her words out of my head. I walked into the study, and there was my husband Tom, looking over our bank statements with a deep frown on his face. "Ellen," he said, pointing to the paper, "there's a $5,000 charge here for a fancy spa. Did you book us a trip?" He looked up at me, his eyes full of hope, wanting a simple answer. My heart sank. I had to tell him no. We called our daughter Jessica, and her voice on the phone was as sweet as honey. "Oh, that! Silly me, I was trying to book your anniversary trip and must have used your card by mistake." The lie was so smooth, so easy. "I'll pay you back today," she promised. Tom sighed with relief and put the papers away, telling me I was worrying for nothing. He wanted to believe her so badly. But as I stood there in the quiet house, I felt a deep chill. A lie that perfect isn't told just once. It was like she was covering a deep, dark hole with a beautiful rug, hoping we would never look underneath. I knew right then this was only the beginning. A week went by, and the $5,000 never showed up in our account. When Jessica came over for her Sunday visit, I asked her about it gently. Her face changed in an instant. The concern vanished, replaced by a look of pity that made my skin crawl. "Mum, we talked about this," she said, her voice slow and patient, like she was talking to a confused child. "I sent it back the same day. Don't you remember?" She even showed me a fake confirmation screen on her phone. Then she turned to my husband, Tom, and put her hand on his arm. "Dad, I'm getting really worried about her. She keeps forgetting things." She listed off every little mistake I'd made that week, misplacing my keys, forgetting a neighbour's name. They were small things, but when she strung them all together, she painted a picture of a woman who was losing her mind. And I saw it. I saw the seed of doubt in my husband's eyes as he looked at me. She wasn't just stealing our money. She was stealing my voice, my memories, my husband's trust. And the most terrifying part was, her plan was working. My daughter Jessica insisted on taking me to my next doctor's visit. "I just want to be there to support you, Mum," she said, her voice dripping with fake kindness. I knew it was a lie, but if I refused, it would only make me look more difficult. In the little examination room with the crinkly paper on the table, she put on the performance of a lifetime for Dr. Miller, our doctor for 20 years. "I'm so worried," she said, holding my hand so he could see. "She gets lost driving home from the grocery store, and she's been having these wild ideas about money going missing." I tried to speak up. "That's not true. I'm fine." But my voice came out shaky and desperate. It sounded exactly like the confused rambling Jessica wanted him to hear. Dr. Miller looked at me with that sad professional pity. He saw a scared old woman, not a woman who was being trapped. He recommended I take a cognitive assessment, a test for my memory. Jessica squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Mum. We'll get through this together." I felt sick. She was using my own doctor to build a cage around me, and he was handing her the hammer and nails. Tom and I decided we had to fight back. We needed proof, something real we could hold in our hands. We drove to the bank ourselves, determined to see the original withdrawal slips. We sat down with the branch manager, a nice young woman who had always been so helpful. We asked to see all the records from the past 6 months. She smiled, but when she started typing at her computer, her smile faded. She looked up from her screen, her face pale. She wouldn't look me in the eye. "I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but you are no longer the primary account holders." My husband, Tom, was confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. The manager turned her screen towards us. There it was, in black and white, a power of attorney document. It gave our daughter, Jessica, full and total control over every penny we had ever saved, and at the bottom of the page, clear as day, was my signature. The only problem was, I had never, ever signed that paper. That forged document was an iron cage, and Jessica snapped the lock shut immediately. Suddenly, our mail started going to her house. The nice man who fixed things around our house for years was fired and replaced with a stranger who I knew was reporting back to her. She even tried to hire a live-in caregiver to help us, but we knew it was just a spy to watch our every move. We were becoming prisoners in the very home we had built together. Her husband, Mark, would visit and play the part of the good son-in-law. He'd shake his head and say, "Jessica's just so worried about you both. She's doing what she thinks is best." He seemed so kind, so reasonable, that Tom almost started to believe him. But I watched his eyes. He wasn't trying to help us. He was helping her. He was the guard at our prison gate, making sure we didn't try to escape. Our world, which used to be so big, had shrunk to just these 4 walls, and our own family held the key. We were completely cut off. When old friends from church would call, our daughter Jessica would answer and tell them we were sleeping or not feeling well. She was building a wall around us, brick by brick. One afternoon, I was staring out the window and saw my next-door neighbour, Carol Gable, tending to her rose bushes. We'd been friends for 30 years. On a wild hope, I scribbled a note on a napkin. "We need help. Jessica is controlling everything. Call me at 3 p.m. tomorrow." I tucked the note into my pocket, my heart pounding. Later, when I took the trash out, I pretended to trip near the fence separating our yards. My body ached as I fell, but I managed to drop the little napkin right by her garden gnome. I didn't know if she would see it. I didn't know if she would believe me if she did. It was a tiny prayer tossed into the wind. The next day, I sat by the phone, watching the clock. At 3 o'clock on the dot, it rang. I snatched it up before Jessica could. "Ellen." "It's Carol," she whispered. "I got your note. What on earth is going on?" For the first time in months, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Our neighbour, Carol Gable, became our secret weapon. She was a retired accountant, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. We couldn't talk much, so we'd leave notes for each other under a loose stone in the garden wall. Our mission was to find out where our life savings were really going. Carol started digging online, looking up public records for any big purchases, anything under Jessica's name or her husband Mark's. "If they're spending that much money," her note said, "they're leaving a trail somewhere." While Carol hunted for clues on the outside, my husband Tom and I had to play our parts on the inside. We had to pretend to be fading, to be confused and content. We smiled, we nodded, we let Jessica manage our lives. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, to look at the daughter who was destroying us and pretend that everything was fine. We were actors in our own home, playing the role of the helpless couple, all while secretly planning to tear their whole evil scheme apart. Carol's search was coming up empty. There were no new cars, no new houses, no secret vacations. It was like our money was vanishing into thin air. "It's hidden," Carol wrote in a note. "The proof must be inside their house." I knew she was right, and I came up with a risky idea. The next time Jessica and her husband Mark came over for dinner, I waited for my moment. As Mark was working on his laptop at our kitchen table, I pretended to stumble, spilling a full glass of iced tea right over his keyboard. He jumped up, annoyed, but I just played the part of the clumsy old woman. "Oh dear, I am so sorry, Mark," I cried. He forced a smile. "Don't worry about it, Ellen," he said. "It's fine. I have a backup at home." His words hit me like a thunderclap. Not that he would get it fixed, but that he had a backup, a second laptop, a secret one. And I knew with every bone in my body that computer held all the answers we were praying for. We knew about the second laptop, but it might as well have been on the moon. Getting into their house seemed impossible, but then our secret ally, Carol, learned from neighbourhood gossip that Jessica and Mark would be at a potluck dinner all Saturday evening. A risky, dangerous plan began to form. My husband, Tom, would fake a dizzy spell around the time the party ended. He'd call them for help, forcing them to rush to our house and keeping them busy while I made my move. Carol would be my getaway driver. She'd take me to their empty house, and I would use the spare key they'd given us for emergencies to let myself in. My only job was to find that secret laptop and copy everything onto a little flash drive. My hands trembled just thinking about it. I was a 70-year-old woman, a grandmother, about to break into my own daughter's home like a common burglar. It felt wrong, like I was crossing a sacred line. But they had crossed it first. They had left me no other choice but to become someone I no longer recognized. Carol dropped me off at the end of their street, and I slipped through the backyard like a shadow. The key turned in the lock with a loud click that echoed in the silent house. I found the second laptop hidden in a locked file cabinet in Mark's office. I jimmied the cheap lock open with a bobby pin, my heart hammering in my chest. When the computer turned on, I saw the folders. One was labelled Financial Plans, another was called Projections. But the one that made me feel sick to my stomach was titled In-Law Project. It was a complete playbook for our ruin. It had notes on how to make me look confused, scripts for what to say to our friends, and a timeline for when to take over our assets. But the most terrible shock of all was who wrote it. Every single document was created by my son-in-law, Mark. My daughter, Jessica, wasn't the monster. She was the monster's puppet. Mark, the man who acted so concerned, so kind, was the cold, calculating mastermind behind all of our pain. Back in the safety of our own home, my husband Tom and I stared at the copied files on our computer screen. The truth was far worse than we could have ever imagined. This wasn't just my daughter's greed. This was a cold, calculated plot that our son-in-law, Mark, had been planning for years. He looked at us and didn't see family. He saw a bank account to be drained. And he used his wife, our daughter, as the perfect tool to get it done. This changed everything. It felt like we had been fighting a storm, only to find out it was being controlled by a man hiding behind the clouds. Jessica was emotional and reckless, but Mark was quiet, patient, and 100 times more dangerous. All his kind words and concerned looks had been part of his act. We now knew who our real enemy was. The question that haunted us as we sat there in the dark wasn't just how to stop him, but why. Why would he go to such evil lengths to steal our future? The files we stole from Mark's computer were full of spreadsheets, but they were written in a secret language of numbers and codes. Our money wasn't just sitting in a new bank account, it was being washed through a whole system of fake companies with empty generic names. Our neighbour, Carol, put on her old accountant glasses and got to work, spending her nights tracing the digital trail. "This is professional," she whispered to me over the phone. "Your son-in-law knows exactly how to make money disappear, but everyone gets sloppy eventually. We just have to find where." While Carol hunted, my husband Tom and I had to keep up the act. Jessica and Mark would visit, bringing us groceries we didn't need and concern we knew was fake. I had to smile at Mark, the architect of my ruin, and thank him for being so thoughtful. I had to look him right in the eye, knowing the secrets we had uncovered, and pretend I was a frail old woman who couldn't remember what she had for breakfast. Every single day was a performance, and I was terrified I would forget my lines. For a week, Carol followed the money through a maze of digital tunnels that all led to dead ends. Then one evening she called me, her voice tense with excitement. She had found it. A single recurring payment, much larger than all the others, that wasn't going to a fake company. It was going to a person. A man named Arthur Vance. The payments were labelled simply as repayment. "Ellen, this isn't about them buying fancy things," Carol said, her voice grim. "They're not living a high life with your money. They are desperate. They're using your life savings to pay off a massive secret debt." A new kind of fear, colder and sharper than before, pierced my heart. This wasn't just about greed anymore. My son-in-law, Mark, was a desperate man. And desperate men are dangerous. They do things that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. Suddenly, the question was no longer just about our money, but about what he was willing to do to keep his secret buried. The name Arthur Vance tickled the back of my memory, but I couldn't place it. It sounded important, familiar. That evening, my husband Tom and I pulled out the old dusty photo albums, searching for a face to match the name. We looked through pictures from weddings, holidays and baptisms, our own life story spread across the dining room table. After hours of searching, just as I was about to give up, Tom said, "I found him." He was pointing to a photo from a fancy charity dinner 10 years ago. Standing there, smiling and shaking hands with our son-in-law, Mark, was a handsome, silver-haired man. I turned the photo over, and there, in my own neat handwriting, was the caption, "Mark and his mentor, Arthur Vance." My heart stopped. Arthur Vance wasn't some shadowy loan shark. He was one of the most respected men in our town, a wealthy developer whose name was on the side of the public library. And he was somehow at the centre of our nightmare. With the help of our neighbour Carol, we started to piece together a story that made us sick. Publicly, Arthur Vance was a saint, a man who built hospitals and parks. But the old business news told a different story, one of a ruthless man who crushed his competition. Our theory was a nightmare. Our son-in-law Mark must have made a secret deal with his mentor, lost a fortune, and was now paying the price. And he was using our life savings to settle his hidden debt, with our daughter Jessica helping him hide the crime. Suddenly, the whole picture was bigger and uglier. We weren't just fighting our family for what was rightfully ours. We were caught in the middle of a silent war between two powerful and dangerous men. Mark wasn't just greedy. He was terrified. He was a rabbit caught in a snare, and he was chewing off our leg to get himself free. The fear I felt was no longer just about losing our home. It was about what these desperate people might do to us to keep their terrible secret buried forever. We were trapped. We knew we couldn't go to the police, not with that forged power of attorney making it look like Jessica had every right to our money. Confronting Mark and Jessica directly was useless. They would just lie. There was only one person who held the power to blow this whole thing wide open, Arthur Vance himself. But going to him was a terrifying risk. If he was in on the scheme, we could be putting ourselves in grave danger. But we were out of other options. It was time to stop hiding and start fighting. My husband Tom and I decided to take a desperate gamble. We couldn't call him or visit his office, so we typed an anonymous letter. We didn't write a single word of our own. We just printed a copy of a bank statement showing the direct transfer of our money into his name. At the bottom, I used my left hand to scrawl a simple question. "Do you know where this money is coming from?" We mailed it to his private office. It felt like lighting the fuse on a bomb, knowing it would either destroy our enemies or blow up in our own faces. 2 days after we sent the letter, our front door flew open so hard it banged against the wall. It was our daughter, Jessica, her face white with rage and her hands shaking. Right behind her was her husband, Mark, and his calm, cool mask was gone. For the first time, we saw the real man underneath, and he was terrified. "What did you do?" he hissed, his eyes burning holes into us. He wasn't asking. He was accusing. The bomb had gone off. Arthur Vance had clearly called him, and their secret world was crumbling. "You have no idea what you've done," Mark snarled, his voice low and full of venom. "You've put this whole family in danger." In his panic, he admitted everything. He screamed about the debt, about how he was only trying to protect Jessica from his mistakes. The fight was loud and ugly. But just before they stormed out, Mark leaned in, his face inches from mine. "Vance is not a man you cross," he whispered, and it was the most chilling threat I had ever heard. "You will regret this." After Mark's threat, my husband Tom and I lived in fear. We jumped every time a car slowed down on our street. We expected a lawyer at the door, or worse. For a week, nothing happened. The silence was almost as scary as the shouting. Then one afternoon, a thick, creamy envelope arrived in our mailbox. It was heavy, the kind of invitation you get for a wedding. But it wasn't for a wedding. It was for the annual charity gala hosted by the richest man in town, Arthur Vance. My hands shook as I read it. At the bottom of the fancy printed card was a personal note, written in elegant, looping handwriting. It said, "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I would be so honoured if you would attend as my personal guests. I believe we have a matter to discuss." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. He wasn't sending thugs to our door. He was summoning us to his castle, to his world, where he was king. We knew it was a trap, but we also knew we had to walk right into it. Getting ready for that party felt like a soldier putting on his armour. I didn't pick out a fancy new dress. I wore the simple blue one I'd worn for my 40th wedding anniversary with Tom. It was the colour of truth and loyalty. Tom wore his best dark suit, the one he saved for funerals and holidays. We were not going to that party looking like victims. We were going as who we were, honest people whose legacy had been stolen. Our friend Carol had printed out copies of everything, the forged document, the secret bank statement showing the money moving from our account to Mark, and then to Arthur Vance. Tom put the copies into a neat manila envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. It was our only weapon. As we drove over to the fancy country club, I wasn't shaking anymore. A strange calm had settled over me. For months we had been mice, hiding in the walls. Tonight, we were going to be the fire that burned the whole house down. The party was a blur of sparkling diamonds and smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. And there, at the grand entrance, was Arthur Vance. He was even more handsome and charming in person, and he radiated a kind of power that made everyone else seem small. He took my hand and smiled. "Ellen, Tom, thank you for coming," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "I'm so glad we have the chance to clear up this little misunderstanding." He led us through the crowd to a quiet sitting area in the corner of the giant ballroom, and my heart stopped. They were already there, waiting for us. Our daughter Jessica stood staring at the floor, her face pale with shame. Her husband Mark stood beside her, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would break. Arthur Vance had gathered us all together. He had brought all the pieces of our broken lives into this one perfect, glittering room. This was not a discussion. This was a trial, and he had just appointed himself the judge. Arthur Vance, the man who was connected to all our pain, gestured for us to sit. He didn't yell or threaten. His voice was calm, which was much scarier. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding," he said, looking at us with a cool, pleasant smile. "Mark made a foolish mistake in a business deal. I was merely helping him recover his losses." He was twisting the story, painting himself as a kind mentor. Then he made his offer. He would personally write us a check for every single dollar our son-in-law, Mark, had stolen. He would even add extra for our trouble. In return, we would never speak of this again. No police, no lawyers, no scandal. He would handle Mark and Jessica privately. He was offering us a clean, quiet end to our nightmare. My daughter Jessica looked hopeful, and Mark looked like a man who had just been pulled from a sinking ship. But I saw the deal for what it was. It wasn't justice. It was a bribe to buy our silence. He was offering to give us back our money, but in exchange, we had to let them all get away with it. We told Arthur Vance we needed a moment. My husband Tom and I walked away from the table, our feet heavy. We stood in a quiet, empty hallway that smelled of money and old paintings. The offer was so tempting. We could just take the check, go home and pretend the last year never happened. My mind was spinning. For some reason, before we left the house, I had tucked a small bundle of my mother's old letters into my purse, just to feel her strength with me. My hands trembling, I pulled one out. It was dated 30 years ago, right after my father died. I read the faded ink, and the words knocked the breath right out of me. It was a letter from my mother about my own sister. My sister had accused me of stealing from our parents' inheritance. It was a terrible lie, a misunderstanding that had poisoned our family and kept us apart for decades. As I stood there, staring at my mother's handwriting, I suddenly felt a strange and horrible connection to my own daughter's crime. I showed the letter to my husband Tom, and his eyes grew wide. We had never told our daughter Jessica the ugly details of that family fight, only that my sister and I didn't speak for a long time. But children are like little sponges. They soak up the whispers and the secrets. She must have heard a twisted version of that story, a version where I was the bad guy. Maybe, in her mind, she wasn't betraying me. Maybe she was just doing to me what she thought I had done to my own family. It didn't excuse what she did. It didn't make the pain go away. But it explained the coldness in her eyes. This wasn't just about money. This was about a poison that had been flowing through our family for generations. And in that moment, my mission changed. It wasn't enough to get our money back. It wasn't enough to say no to Arthur Vance's deal. I had to break this curse, this cycle of betrayal, right here, right now, in front of everyone. My husband, Tom, and I walked back to the table where the three of them were waiting. I could see the smug look on Arthur Vance's face. He thought he had won. I ignored him. I ignored my son-in-law, Mark. I looked straight into the eyes of my daughter, Jessica. "Jessica," I said, my voice so quiet that she had to lean in to hear me. "I know about the stories you heard about me and my sister, about what you thought happened with your grandparents' money." Jessica's face went white. She looked like a frightened child. Mark shot her a look, a silent order to stay quiet. But I kept my eyes on her. "Those stories weren't true," I said gently. "And what you're doing now, this isn't right either. You have a choice. Right now. You can hide behind these men for the rest of your life, or you can find the courage to tell the truth." I had turned their public stage into a private moment between a mother and a daughter. The whole world faded away, and all that was left was her choice. Her answer would decide everything. My daughter Jessica's face just crumpled. A tear, then another, slid down her cheeks. She opened her mouth, a little sob escaping her lips. But before she could speak, her husband, Mark, grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "She's confused," he said sharply, his eyes darting toward Arthur Vance. "My mother-in-law is a master manipulator. She's twisting things." He was trying to put the monster mask back on me, but it was too late. The people at the tables nearby had gone silent. They were all watching. They saw his hand on her arm. They saw her tears. They saw my quiet calm. Arthur Vance's perfect party was turning into a messy public family fight, the very thing he had tried to pay us to avoid. His charming smile was gone, replaced by a flash of pure anger. He had lost control. He glared at my son-in-law, Mark, his voice a low growl that only we could hear. "You were supposed to handle this," he snarled. "You have made a complete mess of this." The alliance between the villains was breaking right before my eyes. Seeing his powerful protector turn on him, Mark panicked. He stood up straight and tried to talk to the whole room. "This is a private family matter," he announced. "My mother-in-law has been unwell for some time. She has delusions." But that's when my husband Tom stood up too. For all these months he had been the quiet one, the doubtful one. But now his voice boomed across the silent ballroom, strong and clear as a church bell. "Unwell? My wife is the strongest person I know. But you would know all about delusions, wouldn't you, Mark? Since you were the one who forged her signature." With that, Tom reached into his jacket, pulled out the manila envelope, and threw the copies of the evidence onto the center of the table. The forged power of attorney, the bank statements. "This man," Tom declared, his voice ringing with righteous anger, "has been stealing my wife's inheritance to pay a secret debt to our host, Mr. Arthur Vance." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Every eye in the room turned from us to Arthur Vance. His perfect evening had just exploded. Arthur Vance rose to his feet, his face like a thundercloud. He looked at my son-in-law, Mark, with pure disgust. "A debt," he roared, his voice filling the ballroom. "You fool. There was no debt from a business deal." He then turned to his shocked and silent guests. "This man, who I treated like a son, embezzled a fortune from my company 5 years ago. I was too kind. To spare his family the shame, I chose not to call the police. I made a private deal to let him pay it back quietly." The room was filled with murmurs. Mark stared at him, his mouth open, completely betrayed. All this time he had told our daughter, Jessica, that he was the victim of a ruthless deal. He had built his whole mountain of lies on that one story. And now his protector had just blown it all up. Arthur Vance delivered the final, killing blow, his voice dripping with false pity. "I knew he was repaying me," he said to the crowd. "But I had no idea he was stealing from his own elderly parents to do it. It's despicable." In one move, he had saved himself and painted himself as a saint, leaving Mark to burn alone. It was over in an instant. The party security came and quietly escorted my son-in-law, Mark, out of the ballroom. He didn't fight. He looked like a hollowed-out shell of a man. My daughter, Jessica, finally free from his shadow, stumbled over to us, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Mum. Dad, I'm so sorry." She collapsed into my arms and I held her, the familiar weight of my child feeling strange and new. The public shame was absolute. There was nowhere left for them to hide. In the weeks that followed, the law did its work. The forged power of attorney was thrown out. Mark had to face the consequences for everything. The money he stole from Vance's company and the crimes he committed against us. Because she told the truth about everything, Jessica was given probation and ordered into therapy. We got our money back, every last cent. We had won. We had fought the monster and saved ourselves. But the victory felt heavy. Our family was broken, shattered into a million pieces, and I didn't know if we could ever put it back together again. Months have passed now, and the silence in our home is no longer frightening. It's peaceful. My husband Tom and I are slowly finding our way back to the quiet life we loved. Our daughter Jessica calls us every Sunday. The calls are short and careful. We don't talk about what happened, not yet. We talk about the weather, about the garden. It is not forgiveness, but it is the beginning of something. We are trying to build a new house on the rubble of the old one. The other day, I was cleaning out my desk and I found the old letters from my mother, the ones about my sister who falsely accused me all those years ago. We haven't spoken in over 30 years. I looked at her name, and for the first time, I didn't just feel the old sting of pain. I felt a little flicker of something else. Resolve. I thought to myself, if I was strong enough to face down my own child's betrayal, surely I'm strong enough to face my past. Maybe it's time to make one more phone call,